Greetings, Carl.
Well, hello, Michael. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. Another day in home office life. That seems to be our reality these days.
Yeah, amazing.
I'm
Amazing.
definitely just as I am an introvert, but as someone that does enjoy our just the conference speaking world and getting out and talking to advisors, like I do miss a little bit just the opportunities to get out and talk to everyone in our advisor world. Like I feel like we're all supplementing with more social media communication, which is something, but not quite the same.
Yeah, for sure. For
Yeah,
sure.
and
No, I agree. It's going to be fun when we can see people in real life again, for sure.
yes, yes. Well, and I know you had queued up as we were getting ready for this episode of now like putting out to Twitter like Kitces and Carl episode coming up. What do y'all want to talk about or hear us talk about? Because usually I would ask people when we're at conferences, when we're not at conferences, so we don't get to ask people
Yeah.
directly. So we're there. Uh, like, what did you hear back that struck a chord most with you of things we can be talking about today?
Yeah, well, I mean, first, I think Greg Davies' suggestion that we talk about swimming in cold water was a good one. But then I realized that would just be me talking and you shaking your head.
Yeah.
So outside of that one, Scott on Twitter asked, I thought, a really good question, which I get asked a lot, about why do advisors or planners feel the need to make, well, he asked specifically, why do they feel the need to make sort of portfolio and the investment process so complicated? But I think we can broaden that even generally. Like, why do we feel the need to make things so complicated? So I thought that would be, I mean, it happens to be one of my favorite subjects. So I thought that would be fun to talk about. So why don't you, like, what, I'm actually super interested because I have a, I have a hunch that people might know my answer about making things complicated. But before I jump on it, what would you say to that? How would you answer Scott's question? Why do we feel the need to make things so complicated?
I think it's because at the end of the day, like the nature of being in the advice business is that you live in complexity. I mean, I think it's what we all get trained for. It's the old school disturbing track. Mr. Client, you think your life is really simple, but let me tell you about all the problems that you didn't even realize you have, right? Disturbing tracks and sales talk. Like, I'm going to come up with disturbing tracks of all these complex problems that you didn't even realize that you have, that you actually do have, that I'm going to tell you about, scare you about, and then it's going to turn out I'm the person that can solve it, and let me come in and solve that problem for you. And like, I don't even mean to knock that. Like, that is true in many situations. Like, people don't even realize the amount of complexity that actually does live in their lives that may need an advisor to come in and help. Like, oh, you think your family situation is simple. Okay, well, actually, let me tell you about how you're setting up your estate plan for a disaster because you've got a business and you can't split it amongst your kids. And here's all these family squabbles that are going to happen. Like, a lot of the time, I think there is more complexity than people sometimes realize. And one of the most straightforward ways that we demonstrate value as advisors is your life is more complex than you realize. I can help you solve this complexity. Here is my solution, which just thrives in the complexity domain, right? If your life was simple and it could remain simple, you probably don't need me. I think is what sits in our heads deep down.
Yeah.
And so when that's the mindset and that's what we're trained into, I think it's naturally where we go. Anybody who comes to the table needing help with simple issues, one of the first things we end out doing is complexifying it. I don't know if that's a word, but I'm going to make that a word, right? And not because we're trying to be like, not because we're trying to confuse or obfuscate or anything. It's just like, if I'm going to add value, I got to show you that the situation is more complex than what you're understanding it to be today, so that I can add value in those complexity points. Because if it was that simple, you may not need me in the first place.
Yeah.
So does that resonate? Do you even agree with that as a premise for why we get paid for advice? Like, do we live in these points of complexity before we get into investment portfolio complexity in particular? Because I do think there's a little bit of a different angle there. But as kind of a base case, I mean, do you think that's valid as why we are here as advisors and the value we provide?
Well, okay. So I think we've got to me, we've got to separate a couple of things. One is like, if we're explaining why we do it, why we make things complex, like, I think that's valid, right? I think to me, I've thought a lot about this. I think there's two primary reasons. Well, I think there's actually three. One, we don't, and this is the part that I want to circle back to in terms of you asking me if I think it's valid. Number one, I think we've misunderstood our value, and that's the part I want to circle back to. I want to hold that for a minute. But two, I think either it's an old sales tactic that we didn't know, which you pointed to. I always think about it as, we've been trained to dig a pit, throw clients into it, and then look down and say, "Hey, I'm the only one with a rope," right? So that, but more.
Yes, but that's the bad version. I want to at least
yeah. No,
take us the good version. But yeah, there is a little of that.
Agree.
Like, I'm gonna dig a hole, throw you into the hole, toss you a rope, and say, "See, I'm the only one that can save you." There's a little of that sometimes.
That's the disturbing sort of track, right? Like, but then I think there's a less, like, as you pointed out, I think most of the people listening to this, like, that's maybe the industry as a whole, but most of the people listening to this show are probably more likely the second version, which is it just naturally happens as you're a human and you move along in your career, you tend to move towards more and more complicated problems. Like,
right.
Clients have more complicated problems. You learn more, you get more, as you get more experience. You see this in all areas. Like, you see this with attorneys, you see this with accountants, so that just sort of naturally happens that way. And without check, it's like a garden that a few weeds grow. And, like, without checking yourself, you don't realize how complex you've become in terms of the language you're using. And you're not intentionally doing it. And then if you get videoed, or, like, you actually listen to it, you go, "Wow, I didn't realize I was using," like, you don't even realize you're doing it. So I think that's the people listening to this are probably more, I would bet 99% in that camp, where it's just sort of this thing that kind of happens. And
like, people's lives get more complex. At some point, it's so complex that they need some help. And so it's like, yeah, that's why you call me, right? If your life is simple, do your thing. When your life gets complex, call me and I can help. I'm an advisor. That's what I do. I help people with the complexity that they can't get through on their own.
Yeah, but here's the thing I think is misplaced. And that is, that statement does not assume that the client wants me to speak to them or make things complex. Like, I think the root of this problem is misunderstanding that we are not in the solutions business. We're in the problem understanding business. I know we have to provide solutions later. Obviously, yes, of course. But first, the massive value we do is in listening, clarifying, and getting clear about A, the current situation, and B, where somebody wants to go, and C, their behavior along the way, right? Like, and so I think where it becomes misplaced, and particularly I see this in the investment piece, is we think that if we make it simple, then people won't pay for it. Like, if I make it simple, they would do it on their own. And I remember when I had my first, and yeah, there's a couple of advisors that love to tell this story. A couple of the folks from the sort of, evidence-based community that you and I have both been parts of. They love to tell the story about when I had a client once who had like $3 or $4 million with me, and we had it in 17 different mutual funds, right? And it was like sliced and diced down perfectly, beautifully constructed portfolio with exactly the right allocation of small and value and international and all that stuff. And we went to do some tax loss harvesting, and the suggestion was to put it into the particular company that I used a lot was Dimensional, and Dimensional had one of their global allocation funds. So we were going to tax loss harvest out of this 17 fund portfolio. We're going to buy the global allocation fund and sit there for, and then the assumption was we were going to trade back. But I was like, wait, this automatically rebalances. Yes, we might be missing out. I'll give you that. You probably, there's like some like 1% of the optimization you could do, maybe you're missing out on, but so I just stayed there, and I had this client with $3 or $4 million with one fund in their portfolio. And of course I had to explain, and the way I explained it is I printed out the 2-inch thick, basically, prospectus, right? Because it had like 14,000 holdings, and
right.
I printed that out and I just dropped it on the desk once and said, hey, look, we're broadly diversified. But my point here is that client loved it. And so then I started doing it for as many clients as I could. And I realized the solution can be simple, super simple, if the client feels thorough. It's the diagnosis that's complex.
Well, but then what happens if you've got a prospect who comes in, Carl, and they've already got a batch of a couple of Vanguard total market funds? It's just that, like, hey, looks like a solid, well-diversified portfolio. I was going to tell you to buy these anyways. Looks like we can't work together. Have a nice life. Like,
no. Well, so first of all, if that was true, you would have an obligation to tell them that. Second, if that's what you think your value is, you'd also have an obligation to tell them that. But I don't think that's a real advisor value. I think you could say, let's get really clear about where you are today. First of all, I've never had that happen. I've never had somebody come in with they raise their hand, and because I can't make you come see me, right? So if you raise your hand and say, you want to come see me, there must be some reason you want to. So I've never had that happen. But if it did, and I uncovered and was like, wow, the portfolio is built really well, I don't think we need to there's a few. I mean, I can't believe how many times I did say this. You've done an amazing job with this. There's a few small tweaks around the edges that we can make. And you and I both know that small tweaks made over long periods of time make a massive difference. And that's what I'm here for. But mostly that's like the prescription, right? And you and I both know from going to the doctor, the prescriptions are like, the prescription's the simple part. Like, the part that was hard is the diagnosis part. And so I just think we've misplaced when we understand. And the other thing I will make clear is sometimes you do need to drop clients right into the middle of the complexity pile so that they can understand. Because I did see some people occasionally take what I'm saying a little bit too far, and it's a drawing, right? Like, there's simplistic, then there's that big ball of yarn, which we call complexity, and on the other side of complexity is a thing called elegant simplicity. And that Oliver Wendell Holmes quote that I wouldn't give a fig, which is such a great quote, it includes fig, I wouldn't give a fig for the simplicity on this side of complexity, but I'd give my right arm for the simplicity on the other side. So occasionally, I think that's the other thing that happens in our minds. We're confusing simplistic, which isn't valuable, with simplicity. And occasionally we get clients who make that mistake, and we need to drop them, sometimes pretty aggressively, right in the middle of the pile of complexity and go, oh, that's cute that you think you know that. Like, I would never use exact language, but that's sort of that's cute that you think that this is really simple, but let me walk you through the 20 years of work that it took to get to this side, right? But that doesn't mean that the solution can't still be simple.
There's two things that strike me about this, which I think just really do very quickly get to the true heart, the true core of the value of what we do. It is, as you're saying, like, it's the client that comes in and already has a nice, low-cost, broadly diversified portfolio where you're looking at and saying, like, yep, this actually looks pretty good. So am I even going to be able to work with you now? Like, what am I going to do? And I think that gets into just a good, healthy moment of reflection, maybe even an awkward point for some people who are listening, of, if the client came in with a portfolio that was already pretty well tuned to what you typically recommend anyways, and you have nothing else to say to them, then by definition, your value is not really what you're doing in your broad advice. Your value at the end of the day is that portfolio thing. Such that if someone doesn't come in and need specifically the portfolio that you're offering, that you're selling, that you're recommending, you may not have enough other value at the table to do it, which to me is distinct from, there are advisors I know out there who have very deep and broad holistic financial planning processes. They do a lot of stuff. They happen to be attached to the AUM model. Portfolio is part of what they do. But if the client came in and said, well, I've already got my portfolio stuff set up, I need help with all these other things, you could just say, well, great. I don't even need to make changes to your portfolio because you already own what we recommend. Now let's talk about all the rest of the advice process that we're going to do with you.
Let me just comment real quickly on that. First, I think, as we said earlier, that would like very, very rarely happens. But if it does, I would be celebrating that. Like, and then I think if anybody's listening and they find themselves in the place of like that little thought experiment caused you anxiety, as Michael pointed to it, I think it's a really good time. I just want to remind you, like, I'm telling you, like, if I could reach out like through the camera or the podcast and grab your arm and look you in the eyes, I would be saying to you, that's not your value. Like that feeling you just had, it's maybe normal, but we're pointing you to something that's like, it's fine that now again, none of this underplays the need to be a technical rock star, right? Like a defensible investment portfolio, a defensible investment process, a financial planning process, super technical. But sitting on top of that is all the work we have to do around goal clarification, getting clear about goals, managing behavior for 20 years, which clients don't come in asking for, but we all know they need, right? And then the small little tweaks around the edges. Like, yeah, building a portfolio is one thing, managing it over time is another thing, tax implications, all of those other things that we do, aside from behavior modification, all those other things we do, that's the value. And really underlying it is aligning your use of capital with what you said was important to you. And it's cool that the portfolio matches that right now. Chances are, if you've ever run into that, it's luck, like they didn't know, like they read an awesome John Bogle book or something, and it was, like, but I just want to make sure people understand that if you feel anxious about that, if you think that's your value, it's really, really important to do some reflection and make some changes, because picking portfolios, designing portfolios hasn't been valuable for 10 years, even though clients are still paying for it. And it's going to become less valuable as we go along. It's really that the aligning somebody's use of capital with what they say is important to them, and everything that comes out of that. Being a guide instead of the map, right?
Well, and I think there's an extended version of this that really is the same issue on the other side of Sir Oliver Wendell Holmes's complexity, right? It's the client where they had a bunch of complexity, they had a big mess. You have simplified it down. And then I think for a lot of us, we start getting that other fear of like, what I'm going to do if at some point the client comes in is like, this is actually simple and straightforward enough now. I'm just going to go ahead and do this on my own on etrade.com. Like, thank you for the help in getting me from a really complex mess to something simpler, but you made it simple for me. I'm good now. I'm going to move on. And again, I think a piece that nags down deep in our brains, either stated or otherwise, of, do I have to make sure I don't make it so simple that they just will decide they don't need me anymore?
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
And it's like a self-preservation thing that starts to kick in.
Yeah, we've got to talk about this, because that's a really that's a fear that I hear often, and it's reasonable and it's valid to fear. But I've been warned my whole career about this place called too simple, right? Like I've been told, I mean, look, it's like a piece of cardstock with Sharpie, right? Like how I've been told that there's monsters that live there, and you know, if you go there, your career will end. And so I thought that sounded kind of fun. So I read every book I could. I hired guides. I think I live there now. And I'm telling you, like, the water's just fine. Like, there's no monsters here. And here's the way I think it's important to understand. I lost one client because of what you just said. I remember who they were. I can remember their names right now. I'm just not saying them, right? I remember why they said it. And here's the way I think you position this. I think from the beginning of a relationship, you are pointing to that land. And I just started calling it the financial pornography detox program as a joke in the second meeting after a client became a client. All right, we're doing all the planning work. This
is your nice way of explaining how you're going to unhook them from CNBC. What did you call it? The financial pornography detox program.
That's exactly right. That's what I would say on the way, walking them to the door. I would say, hey, by the way, just I don't know if you know this, but you just entered the financial pornography detox program. And I would smile and joke. And then I would say, here's how we'll know when it's over, right? We'll know when it's over because you'll start to notice. You'll just start to notice. It's gentle and relaxed. It's not a problem. You'll just start to notice things that you used to think were really important aren't, right? And you'll start to notice that you're not paying as attention anymore. So what you're trying to do, you can do it a lot of different ways. You're trying to set up early on that when you get to the land that feels like everything's simple, we've won. Like, we've become, that was our goal the whole time, was to get you there. Like, I literally want to take this plate from you. If I can get you to the point where you're not even thinking about it anymore, I've just become one of the most valuable people in your life. Like, so you're trying to set that up early. So when you get there, you can go, yeah. I know it's super simple, and if you need to, and occasionally you do, and Michael, everybody listening to this loves these moments where they've got to take, the stereotypical engineer client through the complexity a bit. Like, okay, sit down for 8 hours. Here we go. Right. And a little bit of the, like, slightly sassy version of me is sort of like, okay, I think that's cute that you think this is really simple, but come on in. We're going to schedule through, because look, if you're going to leave, you need to know, like, you can go, like, it's a free country.
The fact that I made it look simple doesn't mean it's simple. So
yeah.
Let me open the curtain for a moment and show you how much complexity I did to make this simple. And then you can decide if you want to do simple on your own.
Right. But I think the really important part of that is, let's not treat the exception as the rule. The rule is that most people are just like, oh my gosh, I don't even think about it anymore. They just take care of it. They make it so. Everybody I know right now, if you ask them what's one thing, oh man, life is just so complex. My money, it's just so complex. I just want it simple. Yep. So if we can deliver on that, and then occasionally we have the again, I'm beating up on engineers. I'm totally being stereotypical, I know, but we have the occasionally we have them that we have to just lay the, oh, that's cute little lecture on. Let's do it, right? But for the bulk of the people, they just don't want to worry about this. So your value is in making it as simple as possible. Even though it feels counterintuitive, that's the value. The more I told people they could do this on their own, the more they wanted help.
It strikes me that, I guess, as Sir Holmes put it, like there really are kind of two ways that you end up coming at this, depending on, I'll call it, like, where clients are in the complexity curve. So there are folks who have not yet had the revelation their life is complex. And so our role, like our path with them, is that we have to start complexifying. Like, you don't even realize the sharks and alligators at your feet with every step. I need to show you why your life is more complex and actually has more risks or problems than you realize. And then I'm going to help you solve them. But, like, you genuinely do need to know you are underestimating your complexity. And so we take people up the curve.
Yep.
Right? You think your simple portfolio is fine. Let me show you how you're actually still under-diversified, how there's some other issues, yada, yada.
Mm-hmm.
But obviously it's harder than the portfolio. And
Let
then
me just
there's a
mention
group.
one. Wait, before you go on to the
Okay.
second group, let me just mention one thing. I think that's a really beautiful model, right? And the one way to think about that is, it's not that we're taking anybody anywhere. It's not that we're digging a hole. It's not that we're complex. It's like none of that. It's literally just like, hey, in order to get you to a really simple place, we're gonna kind of have to go through the messy middle here. And please realize that it can even feel discouraging. I just literally said this to my son last night. He's trying to make some important decisions. I'm like, look, to get to the answer, you're going to have to ask for feedback. You're going to read reviews. You're going to study. You're going to have to understand nuance and edge cases. And when you're in the middle of that, you feel it can feel disappointing, frustrating, like maybe you've done the wrong thing. But it's just, you just got to learn to recognize. So I think using that language with clients, like, look, we're going to get you to the simple place, but to get there, part of the journey sometimes involves going through this sort of messy middle part where I'm going to be asking you questions. You may not know the answers, may feel frustrating. Don't worry. It's all part of the journey. I've seen this hundreds of times before. We're going to get there. So that's like, I love that model of reframing that as it's part of the plan. We know it. I've done this a bunch before. Don't worry. You're normal. Here we go. Right. Okay. Now number two.
And so then number two, you get clients who are already on like further down that complexity journey or further down the awareness of that journey. They are not walking around believing their lives are simple and being unaware of the complexities. They are walking around feeling like their lives are very complex and they're not happy about it and they want it to get simpler. Right. So in like Sir Holmes's quote, they're the ones who have already hit that complexity wall,
right,
and would give their arm for simplicity on the other side. But not everybody, either not everybody's there. Well, I guess if their lives are truly that simple, then we just may not have a lot that we need to add in. But there are the clients who are complex and know they're complex, and our value is to help them get to simpler. And there are clients who are complex and don't realize they're complex.
Yeah.
And we have to actually dial them up the complexity scale and show them, if only so that we can then try to help with the simplicity that comes thereafter. But I feel like there is sort of this reflection of even just who your target clients are and what your approach is. That, like, are you an advisor that helps people with complex lives to make it simpler? Or are you someone who helps people who think they have simple lives solve the complexities they didn't realize they had? And I think both are valid. Although I suppose most of us, I feel like, have been trained in the help people who think they have simple lives solve for complexities they didn't realize they had, because that's basically how you get taught to sell a financial services product. Let me tell you about all the problems you have you didn't realize you have, so I can throw you the rope. We get trained in that end. So when you get trained in the world of, we help people who think they have simple lives, solve the complexities they didn't realize they had, it gives us a natural bent to complexify everything.
Yeah.
And I feel like you are on the other end of that. You tend to live in a realm of people who already acknowledge they have complex lives and want to get them simple. And so they're ready for simple. They're ready to come back down that complexity slope. But it's not necessarily, I think, where some of us are. Like, I think for most of us, we wouldn't have a problem saying, yeah, if I get a client that's super complex, we're going to help like consolidate and simplify their lives. I feel like it's almost sort of a sales problem that we don't always put ourselves in front of people who are struggling with complexity and want to make it simpler. We end up with people who think their lives are simple, and we're still trying to solve for complexities they didn't realize they had, which starts with number one, showing them why their lives are more complex than they realized. And down we go this complexity road for them and for us.
Yeah, I think though that with that group that doesn't really realize it, like the, oh, that's cute group. And I don't mean to be that sassy about it. Like, yeah, like that group that doesn't remember, the only reason you're talking to that group is because they raised their hand. And I mean that even on like your email newsletter, but certainly in your office or on it, like if they come in to explore becoming a client in any way, they've made some decision that like, hey, I need some help with something.
Yeah.
And I don't think there's anything wrong with some language around. I would just reframe the language a bit and be like, look, part of my job, like part of the value of what I bring is there's a whole bunch of stuff that you don't know that you don't know. Right? Like it's because it's not your job.
Yep.
Like I look at a you know, a basic, like, I don't know, I was gonna say like an ACL repair. If you look at how that's done, it's like you know, like it's relatively simple, but there's a whole bunch of stuff that I don't know. Same with technology. Like I make statements all the time to the team, like, oh, we should just build this.
Yep.
They're like, oh yeah, cute, Carl, that you think you just build that. Like there's a whole bunch of things. So I think the language would be more, rather than, because one thing I want to see more of that I'm hoping that we can get is, if you follow this path, if you pull on that thread too hard, you start to feel like part of your job, your marketing job, is to teach people how sick they are. Right? Like how much they have
Oh,
problems, and that's no fun. I don't think people like to be. It's a different version of the whole, right? Nobody likes to be thrown in a hole, and nobody likes to be taught that they're sick. So I think another way to do this is just simply to talk about, one of the reasons people hire you, they don't hire you because they're dumb, right? On the contrary, most of our clients are successful people, or else they're not even talking to you. They hire you because you're a second set of eyes. You're not them. Like my own life is a good example. Like I'm great with other people's money. I'm terrible with my own, right? Because I have these crazy things called blind spots.
right.
And by definition, I can't see my own. And so the way we use that language, most people don't walk around saying that because they don't know. But the way the language is, look, part of what you pay me for is to know things that you don't know. Like there's no way for you to even know. And I used to say this all the time, like, there are so many ways I can help you that I can't even tell you. Like, and there's so many ways that I can help you that I don't even know yet.
Right.
Right. And my job is to be there when that stuff shows up. So I like the model of, yeah, there are people who don't realize how complex it is, but we need to remember they raised their hand in some form because they needed some help.
It's
You then can take them down a road of like, look, I even think I would, if it were me, I would draw this, like, you're going along this path, and as we get in here, you're going to hit that
right.
big ball of yarn, right? And my job in there is to help you see blind spots and da da da. So I think it's super helpful model. Thanks, Michael.
Well, and it's one of the reasons why any prospect meeting, basically the first question I always ask is just what brings you here?
Right.
Like,
I love that
why
question.
are we meeting today?
Yeah,
You could have
love
called
that.
any number of advisors. You could have called them at any point in the past day, week, month, year, or decade. Like, what brings you here right now that we're having this conversation, exploring this advice relationship?
Yeah, I love that.
And
question.
they'll tell you what it is, and like,
Yeah,
they'll tell you if it's
idea.
portfolio related, and they'll tell you if it's not.
Yeah, it's a crazy idea to ask that question. Like, crazy. Like, yeah, that's why I think it's such a great question. Like, how simple is it? And my favorite follow-up question is, what brings you here today? Like, what brought you in today? And my favorite follow-up question is, and how do you think I could help with that?
Oh,
Like only
right.
somebody like you, only
That
somebody
is
like
now
you
my
would go,
follow-up question.
only somebody like you, like, exactly, like, we're all such nerds that we're like, oh, did you? Yeah, because they're gonna tell you, right? And so let's not get too far off topic, because we can cover that in a whole nother call. But the idea
Yeah,
of, like, yeah,
that may be our next episode is, how do you find the value you offer when you're otherwise making everything simple? But I think, so as we wrap up, just I like that framework, as you put it, like the wonderful quote from Sir Oliver Wendell Holmes. Like, I wouldn't give a fig for simplicity on this side of complexity, but I'd give an arm for simplicity on the other side. And just thinking about when for the people you talk to, where are they on that complexity curve? Are you helping people who think they have simple lives solve complexities they didn't realize they had, or do you help people who already have acknowledged complex lives to simplify? But either way, I think it still gets back to that core reflection that just we all have to have when we sit down and look at ourselves in the mirror. Like, if the client came in with the ideal portfolio you already typically recommend, do you have anything else to talk about? And
Right.
if the answer is no, that's the fundamental problem you've got to address in your business. And
Yeah.
likewise, if you have helped a client get their portfolio simpler, and it is, you have succeeded, and they now say, like, thanks for the help, think I'm good here with my portfolio, what else do you have to talk to them about? And if the answer is I don't really have anything else to talk to them about, like, that's the problem. That to me is when you get in the truest sense the shift of what happens when we start to unhinge from being focused solely on portfolios and actually into more holistic advice, not just advice that sets them up for the portfolio we're trying to offer them, but actually more holistic advice. But that's a conversation for a future episode.
So good. So good. Yeah. Thanks, Michael.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Carl.
Yeah. Cheers.
Cheers.